Welcome to StockTrak. This is going to be a brief overview of the new personal finance resources we have available for colleges and universities in the United States. If you haven't used StockTrak before, what you need to know is that we're the leading portfolio simulation provider for universities and high schools since 1990. We help teachers teach investing with stocks, ETFs, bonds, mutual funds, and derivatives. We're used by over 1,000 professors each year, mostly in finance, investments, and accounting classes. We recently expanded our offerings to include personal finance resources as it's one of the fastest growing topics in university campuses today. Since we launched, we helped over 5 million students learn how to manage their portfolio and invest. This is across both universities and high schools, where we work with over 15,000 high school teachers each year. We upgraded our portfolio simulation to include dozens of built-in lessons and activities. So it's not going to be just a stock game for your class. It's going to also have a lot of extra resources tailored to whatever you're teaching this week. This includes things like budgeting, insurance, using credit, managing debt, and a lot more. I'll get into that a little bit more once we get into the actual learning modules. Once you've registered as a professor for free on StockTrak, your first step is setting up a class. The class that you use is going to be the basis for the portfolio simulation. This is kind of the foundation of how we're going to build everything out later. We're going to try to relate all of our lessons back to the portfolio simulation. That way it's going to keep your students engaged in the markets around them. It's going to keep them engaged with learning by keeping up with the class rankings, and it's going to give them a reason to keep coming back to the site to see how their portfolio is performing over the time of your trading period. I'm going to show you how to choose the trading rules and parameters for your class, and it's actually a little bit simplified for the personal finance service level. I'll talk about how. Once you log in as a professor on StockTrak, you're going to be taken here, which is the class creation page. The first step is choosing your class subject. You can see we have a few of them for finance and agribusiness and marketing, but using these is going to give you the full advanced portfolio simulation. By choosing personal finance, it's going to strip down a lot of the extra stuff that your class won't need. So your students won't have to worry about futures and options. It's really going to be a simple stocks, ETFs, mutual funds, and bond simulation. Next, you're going to choose the service level that you want. You can either have it as a full year service, or you can just have it going for a semester long. We do charge more for the year-long service, but most classes will use the semester-long service. Next, just give it a name. The only thing to keep in mind is that your name needs to be unique. So in most cases, after you write your class name, just include the semester. That way, if you want to use StockTrak again next session, you'll be able to do that. And next, put the number of students in your class. The number of students in your class doesn't actually impact your class at all. This is just kind of for our reference. So when we say we've helped 5 million students, this is kind of how we know that. You can choose whether your students pay by credit card when they register, or if we should send an invoice to your university. Most schools use the student payment method, but if your school does have a budget for these sorts of resources, you can just ask for an invoice to be sent to you. Next, choose the date for your simulation. The registration dates is when your students can first come in and create their accounts. This is separate from the trading period. For the trading period, this is when your students can actually make trades in their portfolio updates. After the trading period ends, their portfolios will get frozen in time. So they don't need to worry about selling off all their holdings. We make it very simple for students to log in later and see what it was on the last day of the challenge. Next, tell us a little bit more about your class. This is for our reference when we're trying to build out our new resources for later. The academic goal for your class, the description of your class, and if you're using a textbook, choose the author. We currently have agreements with many textbook authors to include discount codes with their books. So if you're using personal finance, see if you can find your personal finance textbook author in the list. If you're using class notes, just select class notes. Next, we're going to choose the rules that we want to give your students when they're actually building their portfolio. If you have any questions on these rules at any time, you can contact our support team by clicking "Click here for live support" at the bottom of the page. If you're in the United States, in most cases you'll be using the United States dollar, but we do have over 30 different currencies to choose from. The initial cash balance is how much cash you want to give your students to build their portfolio. Most personal finance classes hover somewhere between $25,000 and $100,000 to keep it a little bit more realistic. These larger amounts are generally used for finance classes working with derivatives. Next, choose the minimum prices for the stock trading. This makes sure that your students won't be able to invest too heavily in things like penny stocks. $3 is usually a pretty good place to start. Now choose whether or not your students can trade on margin. This means they'll be able to borrow money, and if they borrow money, they will be charged interest, whether or not they can short sell, whether or not they can day trade, and whether you want your professor account to appear in the class rankings. Some professors like to set up their professor account as kind of a benchmark for their students to trade against. Other professors like to stay out of the rankings to make sure that their students are just among themselves and they don't need to worry about the professor account. You will be able to trade and make demos for your students either way. This last rule is about trade notes. Every time your students go to make a trade, we ask them to write a short note explaining their rationale. You can make this optional by saying no, so students can take notes if they want to, or you can require it by saying yes, so students will have to write something in order to make their trade go through. And this last one is fill orders on daily volume is a restriction on liquidity. This keeps the simulation a lot more realistic. It means your students can only buy things that are actually trading in the real world. For a personal finance class, we recommend keeping this between 25 and 100%. And finally, you'll choose specifically what you want your students to be able to trade. So equities, which includes stocks and ETFs, mutual funds, which is all U.S. mutual funds, and bonds, which includes the U.S. corporate and treasury bonds. For each of the security types, you can choose the commission structure, whether it's per trade, per share, or as a percent of trade, and the actual value of commissions that are going to get charged. You can also set a position limit. A position limit forces your students to diversify. So for example, with a 25% position limit, your students can only put 25% of their portfolio in any one equity. That means they'll need to buy at least 4 different equities to use up all of their cash. If you use StockTrak as part of any other course, you'll notice that a lot of the security types are missing. We do have options, futures, forex, and international exchanges available for the investments and finance classes, but for personal finance, we want to keep this a lot simpler and just give students the most basic types of investments to practice with. Once you have the rules set the way you like, just click Create Class to get your class set up. This will give you a link to give your students to get them registered. By clicking this link, it'll open up a registration page for your class, and it will also give you a confirmation of the rules that we set up. Once you set up your class, you can also create what's called a StockTrak assignment. These are those customizable learning modules you can add to your class. These include things like articles, videos, tutorials, infographics, and interactive calculators, each teaching a different personal finance topic. There's over 100 to choose from, and you can create multiple assignments for your class. This means that you can create a set of activities for the first week, for the second week, for the third week, etc. Each assignment that you set up has its own start dates and due dates. These are the dates where your students can actually see the assignment and make progress on it. You'll be able to build your assignments from the ground up, or you can use some of our recommendations. So basically, your students will have their portfolio simulation to work with to trade their investments, but they'll also have these assignments that you've created for them to progress through while they're working with their portfolio. Let me show you how the assignments work. Once you've created your class, you can go to Admin at the top menu and click Create View Assignments. The way it works is first you're going to have to create a new assignment. Each assignment you create will have its own name. For example, Week 1 assignment. And you'll choose the start date when your students can first start working on this assignment and its due date. Since I set this to be Week 1 assignment, I'll have this last just 1 week. Next, you'll start choosing the activities that you want your students to complete as part of this assignment. This includes things like articles, and in these articles it usually has there's lots of images, there's lots of infographics, there's often videos included in here, and it also ends with a short pop quiz. Students will need to take this quiz in order to get credit for reading the article. You can set these quizzes to either allow them to take retries, which means that they'll be able to retry these quizzes if they don't get all the questions right, or you can leave this unchecked, which means that we're going to save the first try they have for each quiz as a grade in your grade book. These first 10 items are what we recommend for basically every single student. This really walks them through the tutorial and some of the most basic fundamentals about investing that they'll need to know in order to actually get started. If you're using StockTrak for the first time, we highly recommend these first 10 items be the first assignment you give your students. And this applies regardless of its personal finance, it applies for every type of class. Next, we have our intermediate investing tips. This has a few more articles and tutorial videos walking your students through using things like limit orders and stop orders, but also mutual funds and bonds. After these first 25 items, we start getting into things specific for personal finance. This is a lot of activities that you have to pick and choose to go with what you're talking about in class this week. For example, during your budgeting session, you can choose the budgeting, spending and savings plans, receipts, and reconciling accounts articles. These are arranged roughly in the order that we see most commonly covered in personal finance textbooks at the university level, but you can also pick and choose which ones you want to include each week to build the assignment to go with whatever you're teaching. It's a very customizable platform. Beyond personal finance activities, we also have specific career readiness activities dealing with the StockTrak Career Center. This talks about things like different certifications they can pursue, how can they get some internships, what do they need to do well on their job interviews, and how can they start building their resume. The StockTrak Career Center also includes a job and internship search tool that has over 500,000 jobs and internships that your students can browse and apply to directly from within the platform. And finally, this last section is using different types of orders. So you can ask your students to actually place a few trades this week. You can say at least 10 of those trades need to be stocks, but you need to make 15 trades total. You can require them to use certain order types like limit orders and stop orders. This is to get them a little bit more familiar with their portfolio and actually start building it and making trades. Once you have the assignment set up the way you like it, click Create Assignment, and the assignment will be added to your class. When your students log in, they'll now have an assignment progress bar on their dashboard page, and if they go under Dashboard at the top, they can click StockTrak Assignment to see the items that you asked them to complete. Once your class is fully set up, you can start jumping into the reports tools. There's two different types of reports available. The first relates to these assignments that we just created. If we go back to our Create View Assignments page, we now have a report card available. The report card will show you the progress for each of the students in each of the assignments that you've set up. It will show you a completion percentage, and it'll also have a details button to see exactly what they've done for each of the items that you've tasked them to do. If you're concerned about the quizzes, there's going to be a separate tab here for their grade books. The grade books will show you the scores that they received on each of the quizzes that they've taken. You also have the ability to edit your assignments to change the rules later. If you're more concerned with your students' portfolio data, if you go up to Admin at the top menu again, you can click Class Summary Reports. This will show you all the trading data and portfolio data for all the students in your class. For example, the rankings report will show you each student's ranking, and you can also see their open positions, transaction histories, account balances, and trade notes. You also have the ability to add and remove cash from your student's account. The registration file report will show you each of the students who've registered to your class, along with their email address and name they used when they registered. If you have your students working in teams, it will also list the secondary user that your student entered when they first registered. The user summary report will include some useful information about the trading data in your class. For example, how many orders has each student placed and when's the last time they've logged in. And finally, this Reports tab will allow you to export all of this data to Excel or any other spreadsheet program. This account statements report will give you a giant spreadsheet showing each student's open positions, transaction histories, and account balance data for every single one student after another for the entire competition. The historical portfolio values will show you every student's portfolio value at the end of every day of the competition, and trade notes will let you see all of the students' trading diaries for the entire competition. If you want a smaller version of this main account statements report, you can select which report specifically you'd like to see and export it here. If you have any questions about using StockTrak, you can always use a live chat at the bottom of every page. You can call us using our 1-800 number, or at the top menu here you can click Help and go to the Professor FAQ to get some of the most frequently asked questions and get in direct touch with our support team. We wish you luck with your personal finance class, and thank you for watching our tutorial.